From a philosophical perspective, I think we will learn a lot more in the 21st century from Taoism, from Lao Tzu, than from Confucius or Aristotle. Why do I say that? Taoism is a very, very ancient philosophy. Actually, it's prehistoric in Siberia and China. It deals with the universe as an interaction between two poles. In our classical way of thinking, or conventional way, an entire scientific domain, we're dealing with cause and effect, a linear process. Out of the void came the one, and the one then created everything else. That's why in science we are needing a Big Bang, and in religion we always need some, creator at the beginning who does it all. The original cause, or the primordial cause, that's called. Taoism doesn't do that. Taoism starts with the void, and out of the void comes the duality, the polarity. And it's the interaction of the polarity between the yang and the yin that creates reality. It's a completely different view, and a completely different dynamic. And what we now have discovered over the last 5-6 years with the work we've been doing on complexity theory, complex flow networks, that at least for every living system, we're sure that the Taoist model is actually the more appropriate form for understanding how a mechanism works. In other words, and I know this is going to sound strange, what is absent is as important as what is present. The absence of order is as important as order, because it's in that interaction that the flexibility can manifest the resilience to adapt to new circumstances. If you only focus on order or efficiency, which is another consequence of the order, you will end up with a brittle system that when the environment changes, when the conditions or the challenges are modified, suddenly the whole thing falls apart. It's the absence of these characteristics that actually gives the flexibility to the system. I know this is an unusual way of thinking, but that's the key that Lao Tzu in the 5th century in China formalized. Lao Tzu was not the originator of Taoism. He was just the organizer of it, the scribe, the masterful scribe about it. He was scribing stuff that's dated thousands of years before him. Now, in our civilization today, we only understand efficiency. We only push efficiency in engineering and certainly in economics. And the consequence of that is, well, it's normal to have a single system, a single currency, because that is efficient. And then I have to answer, and it is also the reason that everything is so brittle. So we can create an ecology of currencies, multiple currencies at different scales, which is less orderly, which is less efficient, but it's more resilient. And it has the capacity to adapt to the new needs for the 21st century. It would have the capacity to develop, to give space for the gifts, the greater variety of gifts that the humans have to contribute to society, to manifest. When you're dealing with a single system, particularly in extreme yang currency, which is what we have, every feature about our conventional money is yang. It's hierarchical, it's controlled, it's concentrating, it's competitive. That's all yang. When you have that as an only game, then the only legitimate activity that humans have, or the only game in town, is a competitive job, a competitive market. I'm nothing against competition. I have something against its monopoly, because there are many skills, many gifts that don't have the space to manifest.
The system is broke and needs to be reconstituted. We cannot afford to have the kind of chronic and mounting imbalances in international finance. So you need a new currency system, and actually the special drawing rights do give you the makings of a system. And I think it's ill-considered on the part of the United States to resist the wider use of special drawing rights. They could be very, very useful now when you have a global shortfall of demand. You could actually internationally create currency through special drawing rights. And this is, we've done it. We issued $250 billion. And that's a very, very...
The US dollar is the linchpin of the global system. If and when the dollar gets in trouble, it's the entire global system that will fall apart. Such a trouble is actually totally predictable at this point. I knew about it a long time ago, that the system will not be able to sustain long-term evolution. The dollar roll was negotiated in 1945 at the peak of the power of the United States. They took over the role of the British pound, I would say, in terms of managing the global system. That system of privilege, because it is a privilege, would not be permanent. It wasn't permanent for the British either. So the question is what happens afterwards. And the default will be 3 monetary zones which will enter in competition. There will be a dollar-denominated zone or a US-dominated zone, probably the Western Hemisphere, is at least what the United States would like to do as a fallback. There's going to be a European-dominated zone and an Asian zone. And the volatility between these 3 zones will be higher than they are now between all the national currencies. There will be foreign exchange controls between the 3 zones. There will be war between these 3 zones, because zones like the oil-producing Middle East or India don't fit in such a scheme. So who has influence in these critical areas? Historically, those questions have been resolved in war. So that's why I was hoping to create an initiative that would be neutral. A currency that's nobody's national currency. A currency that is nobody's national interest. A currency that would be backed by the major commodities of the global world system. These dependencies exist already. And in addition, perhaps the most important from my perspective was it's possible through such an initiative to create a currency that actually makes it profitable for the biggest, largest multinational businesses to think long term. The thinking long term for the corporations is a precondition, in my view, for a sustainable planet. It's the big corporations that actually make the decisions of what we will be doing in the future. It's not governments, and it's certainly not citizens. So if they just optimize the next 3 or 4 quarters, that will not get us to a sustainable planet that will work for everybody. I was hoping that with a system that makes it profitable to think long term, that would also resolve the geopolitical issues that I just mentioned. You actually remove the pawn from the chessboard. In other words, that dimension would have a safety zone. And that's what I tried to introduce first within the Euro environment. I was blocked, and that's what I've been trying again in the 1990s, actually rather the first decade of the 2000s. And well, it didn't work either, because I now understand why in 5,000 years of history there has never been a preventive change in the monetary system. Because the objections that I got from the bigger businesses after having checked that the system would work technically, that was tested several times, but then the board question is, all right, will this not be perceived as a possible alternative to the dollar? And therefore the Americans will not like it. And then everything freezes, nothing happens. So that's why, historically, no preventive changes are occurring, because there's always one power that has the advantage of the status quo, and as long as that power is there, nobody will dare to change it or challenge it. And that has been what we're repeating now, unfortunately, with a huge cost. Not only to businesses, but to the population on this globe. Because the breakdown of the entire supply chains on a global level will be a very costly affair.
A decline in the value of the dollar is necessary in order to compensate for the fact that the U.S. economy will remain rather weak, will be a drag on the global economy. China will emerge as the motor replacing the U.S. consumer. And of course it's a smaller motor because the Chinese economy is much smaller. So the world economy will have less of a motor. So it will move forward slower than it has in the last 25 years. But China will be the engine driving it forward, and the U.S. will be actually a drag that's being pulled along through a gradual decline in the value of the dollar. So there would be a slow decline in the value of the dollar, a managed decline. And that would be the adjustment that it needs to be accomplished. Now, it could actually get out of hand. And certainly the fear
Let me emphasize, I'm not talking at any point of getting rid of today's financial system or of our conventional money system. Clearly, it needs some additional regulation, and nobody is arguing with that or should be arguing about that. We need to put some constraints on it. It is not a self-regulating system. We know that much. However, it is necessary. It's a necessary ingredient. The people who are claiming the monetary reform domain, there are actually several schools, or some of them claim, well, we need to go back to the gold standard. Well, I'm not against gold as a currency. I don't believe in a gold standard where that becomes a monopoly. What we need is an ecological currency, and a currency of, what we need is a monetary ecology. We need diversity. We need higher diversity. You're not going to create diversity by replacing one monopoly with another monopoly, with one monoculture with another monoculture. The argument of going back to a gold standard is, all right, let's get rid of all the national currencies and only have gold. Well, a new monoculture. Similarly, there are people who are more sophisticated, I would say, than just returning to the gold standard. They say, well, what we should have is government taking over the creation of currency, and that the banks would only be playing the role of brokers, money brokers, which most people believe actually they do. While in the reality, of course, is that the banking system is the one that creates the currency. It generates the currency through debt. Now, same problem. You're putting another driver in the driver's seat of a monoculture. You say, well, the government will decide how much currency is created. It will resolve some problems. It will resolve banking crashes. It would also help getting rid of the issue of sovereign debt crisis, but it wouldn't get rid of monetary crisis. And the reason is that you just still have a monoculture. Put another driver in the car, not another system. That's not how we create diversity. What I'm saying is, let's make the current system work as good as it can, as well as it can, but let's create diversity systems that function in parallel to the existing system, that are compatible with working in parallel with it. But currency that could be created by businesses, business-to-business systems, like the Terra, like the Vir, like the C3. Give examples that are described in the book. Currencies that are created by governments, like the civic. But I would suggest that we do that at a decentralized level, more contact with democratic input on what that currency would be used for. Ecological activities, social purposes, interrelationship learning, whatever it is that the priority is, can be fostered with such government-issued currencies, local government-issued currencies. But that gives you the diversity. Solution is not switch from one monopoly to another monopoly, quote unquote, a better monopoly, even if it can be argued that it's better. It's still a monoculture. That's the box we need to get out of. The box of the belief that one single currency is the solution. That's a patriarchal idea. It's 5,000 years old. Let's wake up.
The Chinese will go bilateral. They already do it. They already have a clearing arrangement with Argentina, and I think they're working on one with Brazil, and you will find that there will be more and more bilateral arrangements. So the dollar will remain the main international currency, but its use will decline. So I think that a world of bilateral relations is less desirable than a continuation of a multilateral system. But the system we have now has actually broken down, only we haven't quite recognized it. And so you need to create a new one. And this is the time.
€1 austerity package. Italy's in deep debt, 120% of GDP, the second highest in Europe. But unions are furious with the cuts, accusing the government of punishing those already at their poorest. Even some of Silvio Berlusconi.
Welcome to this Portland, Oregon rally so that I can hear the people come alive.
We want jobs! We want jobs!
I think it's time for some change. We know it's wrong. We know it's corrupt. I mean, it's getting pretty obvious just how corrupt things are, and it's time to make some changes. That's why I'm here.
With all the people who've lost their houses and their jobs, and the young students who can't find a career, and the fat cats who are getting away scot-free.
I'm here because I think it's kind of the beginning of a sort of mass rebellion in the United States, or at least it could be. And if it goes in the right direction, it could lead to lasting organization.
There has been
From my perspective, the Occupy movement in the United States is just the most recent manifestation of what started with the Arab Spring, with the Indignados in Madrid and the other places in Europe, and which has taken the form of the Occupy Wall Street and Occupy everything else in the United States. I see it as a sign of hope The positive parts about it is that it is a sophisticated, they have movement. It is not falling into the usual traps that have failed in the past. And on the other hand, it's going to be walking on a tightrope. The demands that are expressed are actually purposely not defined. So it doesn't give a target. On the other hand, it may also water down what the results could be. So we're entering a new terrain. I'm hopeful that it will remain peaceful, that they will manage to avoid the challenges that violence will create for it. I hope that it will be capable of attracting a broad enough support to actually end up specifying what it is that we want to focus on. From my view, the easy part was in the Middle East, where you had dictators. In our society, it's a system. It's not an individual. It's a lot harder to pinpoint it. But I think that's what they want. They're saying this system is not working for me. This system is not working for 99% of us. We need to do something about it. I believe what I've been talking about is relevant for that. I'm talking about systemic change. I'm talking about non-violent systemic change. It was John F. Kennedy who made the point that if you make peaceful evolution impossible, you're making violent revolution automatic. Let's hope that the leaders also get that point. I think it's a sign of hope, what's happening. And I hope it will remain a time of hope. But the game is in the hands of the 100%. I'm looking for solutions that can work for the 100%. They definitely have to take into account the needs of the 99. There's no question about it. I think the time has come to realize that we're one. Humanity is one. That we're just different expressions of consciousness, each in our different bodies. And the challenge is to mutate the system to another level of complexity and another level of consciousness. That's the biggest challenge of our times. I hope we are given a chance. There are two ways by which we can get from where we are to where I think we should go to. The first one is while the system is in place, while the official currency system is still functioning, let's introduce pilots, let's provide test mechanisms that give the domain, that explore the domain of what's possible. And then hopefully some of them will emerge and slowly on start diversifying the system. There is a second way, which is not my favorite, but which is likely to be what will happen. After a crash, after a meltdown, what we've done so far every single time is you have a total mess. You have everything becomes currency, by the way. It's barter, survival barter. You have a whole emergence of emergency currencies, as they were called, in the 1930s. In America, they have over 3,000 or 4,000 systems. In Germany, you had several dozen, before they were eradicated by central control. Now, the thing to do would be find out what emerges, which ones are working best, and let them move slowly up to the range where they can stabilize the system, provide complementary systems. But that's not what happens. Every single time, as soon as the burst of the crisis is over, we switch back to a monopoly of bank debt money, because that's the normal way of doing things. So in other words, we never get to the zone where the system is actually viable, but the full system is viable. We always short-circuit it by pushing back to a monoculture. And so far it has been the same monoculture, by the way. Run a couple of mechanics are different. In the 1930s, it ended up with Glass-Steagall. Today, we don't even know what it will end up with. There was a Chicago plan in the 1930s, which was the nationalization of currency, but everybody remained in the box of a single currency. But I think we should give a chance to systems, business-to-business systems, social purpose systems, decentralized city systems that actually would provide a richer fabric of experimentation and see what emerges. Give a chance to the systems that are efficient enough to be given a chance, rather than eradicate them and go back to a monoculture. That's the box we should avoid. And the most important moment will be after, unfortunately, a crash. It's only then that the system is loose enough to start innovating. And that is when we need to protect the possibilities for new models to be given a chance to emerge. Let's be ready.
Do you think that the repeal of Glass-Steagall was a tragic mistake?
No, I don't think so.
You could be a commercial bank like Chase Manhattan, or you could be an investment house like J.P. Morgan, or a bank like Bank of America, or an investment house like Merrill Lynch. But you couldn't be both. And as the 90s went on, the screaming hyenas of Wall Street were demanding that this prohibition, this regulation, be abolished.
As George Bush said, oh, the bankers on Wall Street are drunk.
It is uncertain. There's no question about it. Wall Street got drunk. That's one reason I should turn off the TV cameras.
So who got the money?
To financial institutions in Europe and other countries.
Which ones?
I don't know.
$500 billion and you don't know who got the money? The Constitution says no money shall be drawn from the Treasury but in consequence of appropriations made by law.
This money is not drawn from the Treasury.
Well, let's talk about that. Do you think it's consistent with the spirit of that provision in the Constitution for a group like the FMOC to hand out $500 billion to foreigners without any action by this Congress?
Congress approved it in the Federal Reserve Act.
When was that?
Quite a long time ago. I don't know the exact date.
100 years ago.
The original act is 1914, I believe.
I don't know whether this provision was in 1914 or not, but the Federal Reserve Act was in 1913.
All right, and at that time, the entire gross national product of this country was well under $500 billion, wasn't it?
I don't know.
Is it safe to say that nobody in 1913 contemplated that your small...
The first thing to do is check what gives you passion. Check what makes you alive. What are the values that you really care about? But immediately after that, create a community that you can share these values with. A currency solution is not something one does by yourself. I remember my definition of money is an agreement in a community to use something as a medium of exchange. It's not an individual process. So talk with your friends. Talk with your network. Develop a leadership. Not necessarily your own, it could be a group process. Whatever form that works best for your group. That actually becomes a project. There are now enough models around. And the models have been described, the number of them. 50 different types have been already described in the books that are available now. So choose the ones that fit your community. And by the way, if none of them fit, let's create a new one that does fit. This is the domain of creativity. But let's learn from each other. Let's not repeat the same mistakes. Some systems fail. It's part of, just like the early aeronautics. One of the two Wright brothers died in an airplane crash. So should not be afraid that there will be failures. There will be failures. But for every failure, start two new ones. And we will enrich our collective experience. But there's already a massive amount of experience. Let's start off with using the experience of others to the extent that it can fit what you're trying to do. We are in a learning environment. I claim that every country in the world today is actually a developing country. There's those that are in denial about it and those that are not in denial about it. But we are in an age, the post-industrial age, nobody's figured out how it will work. Nobody. So let's try. Let's learn. Let's share the experiences with each other. And don't wait for others to start it for you. Start where you are. If you can develop credibility in your neighborhood, start something in your neighborhood. If you can develop credibility at the city level, do something for the city. If it's for the state, go for the state. If it's for the world, go for the world. All the stages and all the scales are relevant today. So the quality of leadership, the credibility of the leadership you manage to gather for your project is the scale of your project. Good luck and keep me posted. The press is corporate. The press reflects the interest of corporate advertisers. It is not trying to provide a neutral viewpoint. I find it very interesting, for example, what's not talked about. The fact that Iceland was a big news item for a long time, and then suddenly it disappeared. It disappeared not because nothing was happening in Iceland, but they were doing things that, and got away with doing things, like saying, forget it, we are not going to submit to the demands of the international financial system. We are going to create a new constitution from popular voice. We're going to democratize our systems. And then, suddenly, Iceland is not part of the news anymore. Well, it could have been interesting news for the Greeks or the Italians. So what's not talked about is, in my view, at least as important as what is being covered. How do you address this? I keep hoping that messages that are not the conventional messages can be heard. It hasn't been the case, typically. I'm fully aware of that. But we're all humans. Let's look at the big picture. Let's look at the possibilities that are created out of the box of a few vested interests that prefer the status quo. I claim that large-scale systemic change is not optional anymore. It's going to be an obligation. The only question is how, not the question is whether. And it's not even that much when. The when is now. There are hundreds of thousands of people who focus on the existing system, who are claiming that, well, we need to save it in some way. And I'm not saying no. I'm just saying they're doing that. They're doing that better than I can. I'm focusing on what's new, on what's needed that's new. I'm focusing on building the new. I'm not trying to kill off the existing system. Unfortunately, it's doing that by itself. I'm not trying to criticize the existing system other than drawing the attention to systemic issues, because that's not how we will build a new system that works for everybody.
Who is Alec? The American Legislative Exchange Council.
This is a protest against the American Legislative Exchange Council, also known as ALEC, which is basically an association of corporations and politicians that draft model cookie-cutter legislation in the interest of the profits of these corporations, and then try to get legislators around the country to implement it into law at a state level.
So we didn't know a ton about how this organization worked until recently.
We need a full range of possibilities of exchange. You have the commercial one, extreme young, fine, well established, well operational. At the other end of the spectrum, which is the only one tolerated now, is the pure gift. Okay, the gift exchange. The gift exchange is the pure yin. I fully support it. It's actually the perfection of the yin. However, we need tools in between. I don't think we've reached the consciousness level yet where the needs for everybody will be taken care of on a gift basis. I think that's a possibility. Actually, in Star Trek Enterprises, the movie, you have Dr. Spock saying in 2400, we don't have money. We don't have any money. We don't need anybody. In 2400. Why? Because everybody does what they're passionate about and everything gets done. And they do these things, they're motivated by expanding their own capacities and the capacities of their community. I think that's true in 2400. How do we get from here to there? Well, I think we need a few tools to re-educate our habits. And we've gone a little too far looking just at the commercial solutions to solve everything and hoping that the rest is taken care of. I think what I'm talking about is providing the tools in between. All the way from a weaker young, like the Terra, long-term thinking is not a young, spontaneous process. Or a little less pure yin than the pure gift, the Furyakipu. The simple fact that one accounts for something gives it value. That's what has been discovered with time dollar systems. The very simple fact that people are aware that when one counts the hours that you're actually contributing gives it value. So let's honor that. That's one of the intermediary tools, because measuring itself is a touch of yang. The pure gift, no price, no quantity limits. Mother taking care of her children doesn't say, well, I'm going to give 3 hours today, or sorry, overtime. Okay, or it's going to $5 for breakfast this morning, mom special. It's not how it works. That's the pure gift. We can't do that for everybody yet. And I hope we will someday. But I'm actually focusing the next 20 years. We have an armful of issues to deal with. And I think the pure gift is not reachable on a planetary level for 7 billion people today. I also claim that the pure commercial stuff is not good to solve the problems for 7 billion people today. So the tools in between. That's what I'm focusing on, and it's what I suggest that you look at. Which ones of these, in that wide range, fits your own values, your own priorities, your own gifts. Manifest them there. The terrain is open. The time is now. I think I should emphasize that the solution is not one other system. Okay? We're talking of a variety of systems at different scales for different purposes, and see which ones adapt best to the challenges of today and our cultures, so that they can expand and blossom and give the blossoming possibilities for the gift that people have. What I'm talking about are systems that make it possible to resolve our issues without necessarily having to redistribute wealth. Wealthy people can remain wealthy, financially wealthy, but it doesn't have to be at the expense of everybody else. What I'm talking about is giving the possibility for every child to develop his or her gifts and contribute those gifts to our society on a much broader scale than what's available when it's only a competitive commercial game. Examples of all this? Good Lord, there are so many. There are at least 2,500 systems now, social purpose systems that are fully operational. There are hundreds of systems in the commercial domain that are promising. I particularly emphasize things like the C3 in Uruguay and Brazil, which are now expanding in other countries in Latin America, that will provide working capital to small businesses. These are all very promising models. I look at the Furia Kipu in Japan, the caring relationship ticket, which provides a solution to provide the support that elderly people or handicapped people need without burdening the governments. If you stay in the box, if you stay in the idea of a single currency, there are only two solutions, for example, with the elderly care. One of them is, let's call it the Anglo-Saxon solution. If a pie of a certain size, more people need to eat from it, we cut the pieces smaller and smaller. And maybe that way people die quicker. Or the other solution, what I call the Scandinavian or Germanic one, made a promise. A promise is a promise. Let's go bankrupt. Not particularly realistic either. The real solution is the Japanese one. The Furia Kipu system, started by Hota-san, Tsutomu Hota, in Japan, which is an elderly care currency that takes care of everything that's not covered by national health care, and which doesn't cost anything to the government, and creates and encourages intergenerational relationships at the local level of your neighborhood. These are all models that exist today, can be adapted. Actually, the Fourier-Quipu system is being adapted by one of my colleagues in Switzerland, in St. Gallen now. So St. Gallen is the first European city to introduce the Fourier-Quipu as we speak.
It started out as a very large but very peaceful demonstration, mainly by teachers and trade unionists protesting against what they see a lack of government action on issues like social services, teachers' salaries. But it was very quickly hijacked by a small but very violent group of masked young men who, once they were inside the old city centre in Rio de Janeiro, they tried to attack several civic buildings, also a big office belonging to the Bank of Brazil. They managed to smash down much of the bank. They dragged cash machines out into the street. They set fire to the bank. And it was a very destructive and very damaging scene right in the heart of the city of Rio de Janeiro. I think it took riot police almost by surprise. It took them some time to respond. They then chased the demonstrators through the city centre. But as they retreated, they destroyed banks and other symbols of authority. So visibly a very damaging night for the city of Rio and also in Sao Paulo.
Who is ALEC? The American Legislative Exchange Council.
This is a protest against the American Legislative Exchange Council, also known as ALEC, which is basically an association of corporations and politicians that draft model cookie-cutter legislation in the interest of the profits of these corporations, and then try to get legislators around the country to implement it into law at a state level.
My preferred solution would actually have been that we set up systems on a pilot level, test things out, like Japan has done partially actually in the 1990s and the first half of the for the first decade of the 21st century. And then choose the best models and communicate the learning experiences from the different models. What's now likely to happen instead is a big mess. And it's going to have to emerge out of the mess. We're going to be dealing with a mess for 10 years. Let's be realistic here. It's not going to be pretty looking. But that's a choice we made. I hope to have another chance, and that's why I published a book 12 years ago, to avoid the challenges and the pressure of time that we have now. But the time has passed, not much has happened. Well, let me correct that. A lot have happened. Actually, a lot more than most people perceive has happened. But it has not been empowered. It has not been supported. It has not been brought to scale. And I think we should look at the pearls that have been developed over the last decades already and empower them. That would be the fastest way to get out of the mess. I think the agendas were different for different parts of the system. The constraints on the system were not coming from the political frame. Giscard d'Estaing and Helmut Schmidt, I think, would have been possibly open, I don't know, I mean obviously it hasn't been tested, to more innovations, but the job of making it real was given to the central banks. This was a meeting of central banks, this was a central bank process. So in retrospect, it's a little bit like asking the Pope to inaugurate a Buddhist temple. it's not terribly likely that such a process would actually take place. So the constraint was, from that perspective, the impulse was definitely political, but the constraints, some of the political constraints were there too, actually, thinking about it. I would say that the no exit door, for example, and the idea of that the governance system later came from the political front. But the tactical part, the monetary part, was within the box of the central banks. And as the governor of the central bank actually called me in and basically saying to do not even mention any idea other than that, like the one I was talking with, which is a commodity-backed currency. To me, the euro was a chance for a consciousness breakthrough. I always have visualized Europe as a rich fabric in which each culture has its own color. And it's the intertwining of them that actually makes like an embroidery-rich feeling about it. So every culture keeps its qualities, but it's part of a harmonious whole as opposed to be a conflict zone. I am the first generation to reach my age in my lineage since the Middle Ages, since the Crusades, to have lived to my age without having a war. My father went to war, my grandfathers went to war, and everyone before that had been living in a war. Of course, living in Belgium, which is called the buffer country, makes that rather a bit predictable. But that's the meaning of Europe. To me, it was the possibility of creating a peaceful zone with a rich intertwining of cultures. And the fabric, the economic fabric, is actually the money system. So that is what pulls together all the threads. So that's what I thought was a possibility. I also saw it as a possibility to introduce the flexibility for the changes that I knew were coming. These changes would be substantial, and they will be the biggest in any generation, actually, in my lineage. So dealing with an old-fashioned carcan of a simple single system, I knew was not going to be able to deal with what was coming. So I hoped to have some doors and some passageways in the design that actually would make the resilience, the economic resilience, stronger. That has not been possible. When I started talking of an earlier version of the Terra, of a global currency, that's nobody's national currency, that would be capable of resisting any shock to the global system, I was ordered to shut up. So we did what we could. The constraints were quite explicit. Number one, don't change anything in the system, just the geography. The number two, don't have an exit door. This is part of a strategy to actually pull the countries politically together in the long term. That was an explicit aim, so therefore no exit door. And the third one is, well, let's deal with the governance system later. We'll just deal with the technical part. And of course the unraveling has been happening exactly in these weak spots. The governance is not in place, it was improvised. And one doesn't improvise monetary policy. I always say that, it's one of the sayings in central bank circles, monetary policy is like sausage. It's not a good idea to see it made. So, and they're making it in public, with everybody looking behind them, hoping that their electorate will not be too upset. Can't work. So it's a sad consequence. A dream that's probably dying.